So as we launch in this next series, some of you have looked at what's on the agenda for the next few weeks. That's titled Courage and Sacrifice. So courage, faith, character, sacrifice, and community. And then September 17th is the WiLD Summit. So this is what I was realizing as I was preparing for this content today is how core this is to everything that WiLD is about and everything that whole and intentional leader development is about. Because it really represents the character center, I would say, of our work with leaders and our belief that from that center, that so much else of what it's all about comes. And I also want you to know that while I love humor, this topic, I think, may bring out an intensity in me that may seem overly convicted and less invitational than other topics. I hope not. But my hope is that you will know that this is personal for me because courage, specifically, and the topics that are coming in the future weeks are things that I will wrestle with for the rest of my life. I don't have all the answers to what this is about, but I do have some interesting, I think, perspective on what the research has said that this is about and what is a WiLD approach to this whole conversation. So I want to start off with this, and I want to read to you, if I could, the WiLD mission statement, because I mentioned to you this is core to who we are. And so the WiLD mission statement reads this way. This is the mission behind our work that many of you have experienced: to intentionally prepare a generation of courageous and sacrificial leaders who will lead the way in reflecting light into a world where darkness is the default, a generation of leaders who will bring thoughtfulness, conviction, hope, resourcing, strategic thinking, and deeply rooted care to the institutions and people that they serve. That first part of this statement, where it says intentionally prepare a generation of courageous and sacrificial leaders, what that means to us, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in that, but the concept of courage, and let me just say it this way, that leaders, it's investing in a generation of leaders with enough efficacy and confidence and awareness and fortitude to step out and go first. But also the sacrificial character and readiness necessary to consider what they may need to sacrifice for the sake of those within their influence. And that, I would suggest, that is hard work. And by the way, I also wrote a book called Dying to Lead. I don't know if you get it, the double meaning, dying to lead. Like, you gotta want it, and you also gotta be willing to sacrifice for it. Like, it's an interesting way to think about it. So a lot of this it runs back pretty deep for me. So let me just launch in, and I'm going to give you some handholds because this is a deep topic on courage, but I'm going to give you, I think there's 5 points in my notes that Claire will be inserting into the comments. But first thing I want to say is this. So as I was preparing this, Emily, the self-proclaimed hippie barista, that's what she told me, in the local coffee shop I frequent often, sat down at the table next to me. And this was just a couple days ago. Never sit down next to me because I might ask you a question that may make your brain hurt. You'll be like, why in the world did I get cornered by this guy? But I asked Emily, I said this, I said, what does the word courage make you think about? And she immediately said bravery. And then she asked me what comes to mind for me. And I said fear. And I said, courage doesn't exist without fear in my mind. To which she said, but isn't fear something that isn't real yet? Because it hasn't happened yet. And I thought to myself, and we didn't talk much longer because she had work to do and I had work to do, but I think she's right. Fear may not be real yet, but just because it is based on something that may or may not be coming, does that make it any less real? Probably not. Too much fear without any courage, and we're stuck at the mercy of the emotions that will contain us. But too little fear, and we lack an awareness of what we might need to change to be the human beings we might become. Here's what her comment made me think about, that fear isn't the enemy until it becomes what defines us. Up to that point, a reality-based fear is part of the recipe for mustering the courage to do the next thing. Courage is a thoughtful movement forward in spite of fear, not after dismissing it. Courage is a thoughtful, sometimes I write things, I'm like, I got to think about that. Courage is a thoughtful movement forward in spite of our fear, not dismissing it. So here's point number one. And those of you that are new, by the way, this is what Rob does. So I'm just here to kind of stir the pot, give you some things to think about. and sometimes drop some research into that, because I spent 25 years as in my adult life as an industrial organizational psychologist. So concepts like this are not foreign to this world of leadership development and so on. But point number one, courage and fear are a part of character. Courage and fear are a part of character. Now, courage is oftentimes cited as a character virtue. We did some writing on this that I'll reference in just a bit, but I would suggest to you that character is not a list of virtues, but actually a list of competing tensions, more realistically. So courage is a character thing, and let me explain. While much of the writing about character shows character as a list of virtues, I want to suggest that it's less about a list and more like a set of these competing tensions, paradoxes, if you will. It's less like a statement of be this and more like a statement of looking at ourselves between this and that. There's so many paths I could go down with this related to the way that great TV shows like model character. It's like the most intriguing characters are between this and that. There's like this struggle that we see in them that we're drawn to, I think, because it's what our lives look like. Whether it's humility and conviction, this is a whole nother talk we could do. Vulnerability and integrity, or courage and fear. These are just some of the tensions inherent in the human experience and the human experience of leading. And these paradoxical tensions are everywhere, regardless of your work context. This is a bold statement, but I think it's true. They transcend any organization's missions and values. These tensions do. Like every aspect of our character, courage has a sibling and paradoxical virtue that is often hidden behind it. And that sibling is fear. And I'm saying this at the risk that some of you are scowling at me right now. I'm not have all of you on my screen just so I can't see it, because that would be really derailing for me. But maybe you are. Okay, if it's okay if you are, because it's part of this as we get smarter together. But I want to invite you to the possibility to consider this, that without fear, there's no courage. Let me tell you some of the things. We did a ton of research on this over the years, my research team. Nearly every definition of courage defines it as something that allows us to take a stand, to move, or to act in spite of fear, in the presence of fear. Other definitions go on to say that courage is about the ability to do something that is frightening. Wow. Why is this important? Why is it important to consider fear as a part of what courage is all about? I think it's maybe because of this. Consideration of our fears as a part of our building courage is necessary because it's the real story already. While we're drawn to bold statements of courage, I'm seeing them all the time on Instagram and other places, bold statements of courage that push fear away. Pushing it away is not only not the whole story, but can, I believe, from a leadership perspective, be downright reckless. Courage without an awareness of fear isn't courage at all, but oftentimes simply blind and bullish conviction. And I'm getting a little convicted. I know some of you, again, I'm okay if we argue about this, if we fight through, because we're going to get to the point where we get to more truth together. But I would say this is what I wrote down. I care too much about the leaders within my influence and the people within their influence to give them a watered down definition of courage that is all about pushing away their fears and just doing it. I won't do that to make you comfortable in the moment and fail to prepare you for the reality of the moments that will take real courage. And I think many of you are probably like, bring it, like that's my life, right? But and I'm thinking, how do we help do that for others in a bold sort of way? Those moments where we are facing those fears will be powerful and will include an amazing collision of our reluctance and our boldness to step forward. I wrote this in a paper that we wrote a few years back on character, and courage and reluctance was a part of that. And I just want to read this. It says, in spite of our reluctance, courage is the strength we hold on to in those punch you in the gut moments of vulnerability. In order to become more vulnerable, we must evaluate and accept the risk of letting our guard down and invite others into our core insecurities or fears, because this opens the door to possibility of being torn down and exploited. Because vulnerability opens the possibility of being torn down or exploited. It opens us, it quite literally means the openness to being hurt. Because it's that, courage is necessary. Like real courage is deeply rooted courage is necessary. So point number 2. So the first one's about, if it's connected to character, it has to do with fear. So why courage? One of the greatest paradoxes in our human experience is this: the things we fear and yet have the courage to approach create the greatest potential for change. I think that's true. Not change at a surface level, but change at the deepest levels of who we are. Changes in us that will cause us to never see our world the same way again. Embracing the paradox of courage and fear creates that possibility for change. This happens every day in our work when a leader for the first time shares what they're learning about themselves with their team. It takes a truckload of courage for leaders to do that. I've become so aware of that in our work with every executive, every manager, or when they admit they don't know the answer, or they apologize, or the leader who has made great progress in their development and in the development of their team then experiences a setback in their organization, and in spite of the fear that comes on, I've seen this over and over again, pushes forward into the long haul. If the things we fear create potential for courage, what are some of those moments we commonly experience? So I was just writing down some of the things that I know have impacted me, moments that have impacted our character forever. Courage is what allows us to risk being honest. Courage is what it takes for leaders to stand in the storm. Courage is what allows us to take the risk to serve others and not just ourselves. Courage is what allows us to make a career transition and to take a calculated risk. Courage is what brings us to the possibility of responding to a calling on our lives that may scare us to death. Courage is what allows us to say we're sorry, to speak up, or to shut up, to do something different from our default. Courage is what allows us to be vulnerable with others in spite of the risk that it involves. Courage is and always has been at the root of, I don't know, this is a bold statement. I'm just writing stuff. Courage is at the root of the redemption of our world. Not only courage to be you, but the courage to sacrifice that which is sacred to you for the sake of others. Courage is what it takes to stand in the direct line of our deepest and most overwhelming fears and not only face them, but move in a direction toward them and toward that which we want most deeply. Courage is a huge part of our character and identity, and it always happens in the presence of our reluctance and fear, not in its absence. Here's part 3, courage and leadership. It's like, what does this have to do with leading? Leadership reluctance, that's a word it's a way I love to talk about fear. Leadership reluctance includes a healthy sense of the stakes in the job of leading, or stated another way, reluctance is a connection to the high stakes for followers and for leaders. There is always some cost that may have to be paid for any decision we make. Leaders who are connected to those stakes must be given permission, just listen to this, to communicate both courage and conviction and a healthy sense of reluctance. In many cases, the worst hiring decisions we could make would be based on courage alone. And I think what's interesting about this, and I've said this many times, is like, can you imagine if we interviewed for reluctance? I don't think we should ask any senior leader, anybody to take on a leadership role, unless we ask them, what causes you to be reluctant to take this job? And if someone's not willing to go there, are we willing to stake everything on that leader's presence in our organization, whether it's our nonprofit or our business? But it's so funny because we completely sabotage a person's capacity to actually answer that question honestly. I don't know if we look for it. I don't know if we do. I wrote in Dying to Lead, I wrote this chapter called Reluctance to Lead. And in it, I'm going to read just a little piece of that. It says, if your leadership is about you and your survival, you probably won't understand the concepts of a reluctance as a strength, because I indicate that it actually could be something that would be a core competence. The reality is that leaders who make their leadership about them or only those close to them and miss the opportunity to serve others don't yet understand the cost, because they have focused their attention on reducing the cost. Leading well is such hard work, and a realistic leader will express true reluctance to lead along with a message that says, I know it will be tough, but I feel like I'm supposed to lead here. Man, can you imagine hiring a CEO who said that? How awesome that would be. And we got to be honest. It takes an incredible amount of courage and self-awareness to communicate that reluctance. Just think of your last job interview. If you felt it, did you communicate any reluctance to the person interviewing you? Like, did you feel a permission to do that? In your defense, reluctance is often seen as a lack of conviction or a lack of courage. in the spirit, and also in the spirit of honesty, shouldn't we be willing to express reluctance if we're feeling it, without fearing that those talking with us will see us as wishy-washy, fearful, or a misfit for the job? There's so much more I could get into that, but we're going to get into some of these other topics in other weeks. But so let me make this personal for just a moment. Let me ask you this question. When was the last time you made a decision or took action that required courage? For me, the most immediate example that came to mind, there's lots of them, but was the decision to leave my job as a professor after 25 years as a university professor and department chair, and 17 years leading a department and program that I had the privilege of launching from scratch. It wasn't a decision that I made in a moment, but a decision that I made as a result of many conversations, moments of encouragement, of challenge, of hesitation, and of thoughtfulness that included my wife, my mentors, and other key people in my life. The courage to make that decision wasn't something that I had right away, but something I built, something I mustered. And so here, this is interesting, right? Why is courage something we muster as opposed to something we have? To muster, listen to this. So crazy how these topics open up just interesting stuff. To muster is to gather or assemble. If courage is like that, it means what courage is about is not only something that we simply have, but something that builds. Why is that? Why is courage something we gather toward in the moments where it's needed? And how is that different than some motivational poster in an office that says, courage is in all of us? Do you hear the difference? Like, what if it's something we muster, something we build? How is that different? So how do we muster courage? And if I said that another way, like, what are the long-term investments in ourselves and in others that muster up the moments where courage will be necessary? Like, as a person, like, I'm all about, so many of you know this, all about whole leader development. Say, what do we already know that we might apply? And what it got me realizing is I was even thinking about this week's content. If courage is something we muster, then some of the nuts and bolts of investment in a person's development are the things that muster that courage. And they're not that complicated. I spent my whole life building a system for leader development. Some of you know what the WiLD Toolkit's about. Like, we're having a conversation. I hope some of you will stay for the next hour. We're talking about the skills and knowledge inventory that's all about assessing your competence. I told a CEO yesterday, I told the CEO, I said, one of the most important things I'm going to push you toward this year is you understanding your specific competencies, because I also know that him understanding that, as well as his blind spots, will help him to move more in a healthy way into these moments that will require him to move in with courage when his organization will go up and down this year. And so if you think about some of the things that are a part of what mustering courage is about, understanding that it has to do with understanding the things that we're good at, understanding the things that we are called to, understanding the purpose for which we are here, understanding the experiences we've had that have taught us things, and the experiences that will shape us in the future and that we desire in the future. Understanding our core competencies is a part of courage. Understanding who's surrounding us and who maybe could surround us. Understanding who's mentoring us. Understanding even our own motivations and our awareness of our own personality. That all those things are about what it means to build up in an effective and intentional kind of way toward these moments that will require tremendous courage. So that's really my fourth point. I don't know if I told you that, but that's point number, well, I think I skipped point number 4 and just moved on. So but I hope that makes sense. So I want to give you one more. This is a big one too. Megan, I see you laughing. This is a big one too. Point number 5, courage is customized. This is a big one. We don't think about this often. We don't think about this often across all the topics that we talk about in the WiLD conversation, and they're necessary. When we use a word that we call, the word is bespoke, you'll hear different members of our team use that word. The word bespoke, there's a men's tailor shop that's near my home. I've never been in there, but I love it. It's called Bespoke. It's a tailoring shop. So it's tailoring a suit or whatever clothing to you. So when I say something is bespoke, what I mean is that it's customized. It's tailored to you. So here, this is a big deal. Courage is something that looks different for different ones of us. I have said this, and I've had people kind of really scowl at me about this. but I have many firefighter friends. And for them, they would say that running, some of them, not all of them, some of them would say running into a burning building is not courage for them. And I think we need to be okay with that, because they would say that they don't have fear for that. Ask that same firefighter to speak in front of 100 people, and they will say that will take courage in me like you've never imagined. And my point is this, is that courage looks different for different people. So it's part of that discovery process. If we're going to invest in people in a whole way, would be to understand that there are certain common frameworks around courage that are probably common categories. There's taxonomy of things that are included in it, like competence, for example, is something that's common for us to work on, but that our competencies look different for different people whose faces you're looking at right now. And here is my, I hope that this is true, that what I've just mentioned just now, that in some way, even in spite of the fear or resistance you may feel, that somehow this talk about courage will encourage you in some way. And so I want to give you just maybe three talking points and a key question as we launch out into talk about this and get smarter together. Number one, true courage happens in the presence and awareness of fear, not in its absence. Fear is not only the opposite of courage, it is necessary for something to be defined as courage. So that's the paradox. Number two, courage is a fundamental component of character, but just one component. And number three, courage is bespoke. Courage is customized. But its foundations may be shared. What frightens me may be very different from what frightens you. And then finally a question. I don't know, with all the things I've said, what are the implications for you, for your work, and for your attempts to encourage others? Let's go talk.